But in the meantime, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. J. Kevin Graffagnino, who is the director of the William L. Clements Library. So Kevin has been with us since November of 2008, and of course holds degrees in history, a BA and a master's degree from the University of Vermont, and his PhD from the University of Massachusetts. He has had a long career, including serving as curator of Vermont collections at the University of Vermont Library, director of the North American History Research Library with the Wisconsin Historical Society, executive director of the Kentucky Historical Society, executive director of the Vermont Historical Society, and now, of course, we're lucky to have him here. And in addition, he has edited or authored 19 books, the most recent of which is co-edited with other Clements colleagues, Brian Dunnigan, Cheney Choperet, and Amiko Hastings. And that book is going to be published by the end of the year and is called A Great Library, Easily Begets Affection, Memories of the Clements, 1923 to 2015. And with that, I welcome Kevin.
Good morning. So how many of you in your years as UM students walked by the Clements every day and never went inside? Yeah, that's the norm. Most people probably from the 1920s to the 1950s, you probably wouldn't have been let in as students, but some of you missed a good opportunity for one of the unique things about our campus. So if you'll sit back, I will try to tell you what you missed and give you some incentive to come see us now. Clements Library was founded by William L. Clements, shown here. He was an Ann Arbor native in 1882, graduate of the University in Engineering. Soon after graduation, he moves north to Bay City, a couple of hours north of here, because his dad had a share in what became known as the Bay City Industrial Works. And they made heavy railroad equipment. They made cranes, steam shovels. Their most famous product were the steam shovels that dug the Panama Canal. Mr. Clements prospered as its CEO, late 19th, early 20th centuries. He became wealthy, not rich, not Henry Ford rich or J.P. Morgan, but quite well-to-do by the standards of a time in which there were no taxes and other pesky intrusions on a person's money. 1903, he's 42 years old, he decides to start collecting American history. He begins by buying the collection of his friend and neighbor Aaron Cook, who was a Bay City merchant, and he continues enthusiastically with that as the principal focus of his life for the remaining 3 decades. He decides to concentrate on early Americana. Printed paper Americana begins with Christopher Columbus, and Mr. Clements buys treasures like this. This is known as the Columbus Letter. When Columbus comes back from the first voyage to the New World, he publishes a letter saying, "I think I've found India." And it's printed in various cities in Europe. This is the Rome 1493 version. Mr. Clements paid $15,000 for this in the 19-teens, which was a lot of money, and he thought he'd been taken to the cleaner. He said, "I have to have it because it's the first piece of Americana," but I got bilked. When I got here in November of 2008, a dealer offered us one for $1.5 million. So I think Mr. Clements' investment worked out okay, because it's one of those things, if we didn't already own it, we certainly couldn't afford to buy it. Mr. Clements is especially interested in early explorations and discoveries. And a title like this is Thomas Harriot's A Brief and True Report, Newfound Land of Virginia. It's important because it's the first-hand account of an English settlement in the New World. Harriot came over with one of Sir Walter Raleigh's voyages, went back to England, and wrote an account of this. Mr. Clements bought this in the 1920s. Ours is the last known copy to have come on the market. I like to tell people when I'm bragging about the library that Bill Gates could not recreate the Clements with his $65 billion fortune, because if he wanted a Harriet, he'd be out of luck. There are 6 copies on the planet. They're all in libraries like the Clements. Mr. Clements called this the star of all Americana. I often ask collectors when I go to see them, hypothetically, the house is burning down, what do you save first? This, I think, would have been Mr. Clements' answer. And it's been amusing for me, having done this for 40 years. No collector, male or female, has ever said, well, I'd save my husband or I'd save my wife. It's always a book that they give me in response. So I think this would have been the first thing Mr. Clements would have tucked under his arm. Another great example of discovery and exploration, John Smith's Description of New England, 1616. Smith, of course, was a principal in the settlement of both Virginia and of New England. Mr. Clements collected explorations, discoveries by every European nation that came to the New World. This is Samuel de Champlain's Voyages in Nouvelle-France. I'm fond of it because I grew up and spent much of my career on the shores of Lake Champlain. So I think this is a good one. Eventually, Mr. Clements branched out into other areas. This is Anne Bradstreet's The 10th Muse. It's the first published book of poetry by an American woman. Wouldn't have mattered to Mr. Clements. He was a thoroughly Edwardian Victorian fellow, but the result of his collecting so broadly is that we have tremendous material on the social history topics that contemporary scholars are most interested in. As here with John Eliot's Indian Bible. Eliot was a Christian missionary in Massachusetts in the middle of the 16th century, and he decided that the best way to convert the Natick tribe with which he was working was to translate the entire Bible into their oral language and then turn it into a written language, to no noticeable effect in converting the Natics that we have ever been able to document. But this thing is 650 pages of up biblum God, the Bible in both Old and New Testaments in the Natick language. And for modern scholars who are trying to recreate early Indian languages, this is the source you go to, because almost nobody on the planet speaks Natick today. So this is how you study that early American language. As with many collectors of his generation, Mr. Clements was principally interested in military history and political history. Consequently, the library's holdings are wonderfully rich in material on the wars for control of North America in the 18th century. French and Indian War, the American Revolution, et cetera, et cetera. This is a beautiful hand-drawn map of Fort Ticonderoga in 1758 by a French engineer, and this is during the war in which the French and the British lose thousands and thousands of their soldiers, either trying to defend Fort Ty or to take Fort Ty. Here you see the title page of Major Robert Rogers' journals. He's the American soldier who invents guerrilla warfare, who takes fighting in North America off of pitched armies facing each other across a plain or a field into hiding behind rocks and trees, which is a lot better suited to the American terrain. Some of you may know Rogers best through the 1939 movie Northwest Passage. Spencer Tracy playing Rogers as if Tracy were auditioning to play Hamlet. It's one of the worst history movies ever made. It's way past time for Hollywood to look at Kenneth Roberts' historical novels and do them over and do them better. Rogers achieves his greatest fame in the French and Indian War, conflict, of course, that ends with England's victory on the Plains of Abraham outside of Quebec City. The British general, General Wolfe, wins the battle, is killed in the process. Montcalm, the French general, also dies in the battle. And Benjamin West creates one of the great historical paintings of the 18th century, The Death of General Wolfe. If you've been in our building, this is probably the thing you remember best about being in the Clements Library, because this is, I believe, something like 9 feet wide and 6 feet high. It is West broke new ground. He was widely criticized in the 1750s for doing this. He didn't put General Wolfe and his soldiers in Roman togas. That was the way you were supposed to paint history and the military. And he broke that convention. Here you see him and his soldiers in the actual uniforms they would have worn. Mr. Clements bought this in 1928 from the descendant of the German prince who commissioned it in 1770. Brought it over here. It's been in the great room ever since. It's currently on display at UMA. And it's kind of neat because in the great room it's 10 feet off the floor. At UMA, it's right at eye level. So you can see tremendous detail that isn't available to you unless you are a 7-foot-tall basketball player. So go see it in UMA. We hope to have it back at the Clements fairly soon. From the French and Indian War, Mr. Clements moved on to the American Revolution, the war that created our nation. He acquired thousands of British and American titles about the war, about the movement towards the war. You've got to remember, this is an age where there's no CNN, where there is no Twitter. If you want to make an argument, you go to the printer and you print a pamphlet. And that's how you get your case across. So we have certainly one of the best collections in the world of the political debates that separated England and what becomes the United States. This is Joseph Galloway's arguments on both sides of the dispute. Mr. Clements also collected maps, which I am tremendously fond of. I think they're wonderful teaching resources, and this is my favorite among the Clements maps. I'm from Vermont. Once you get used to the fact that north goes this way, right there, that's the first printed use of the word state of Vermont on a map. So it's a wonderful little political statement and propaganda statement that the state of Vermont, which had broken away from New York and from New Hampshire, had a right to exist. And so this one, if you want to see this when we're back, you'll have to come to my office, because as soon as I got here, I had it framed and put on my wall to remind me of where I'm from geographically. Mr. Clements decided to branch out from the books and the pamphlets and the newspapers. He gets deeper and deeper into being a bibliomaniac, in other words, and he can't stop. He starts buying manuscripts, the handwritten letters, the diaries, the military records. In 1921, he buys 221 bound volumes of the papers of Lord Shelburne, who was a British political official who actually serves as prime minister during the last part of the Revolution. Pays a whopping $10,000 for this collection. It's kind of ironic. If you want to study Lord Shelburne, you have to come to Ann Arbor to do it. You can't do it nearly as well in England as you can here. And despite this picture of him in a golf foursome, he is next to, let's see, Regent Sawyer, Regent Beale, and President Little. There really wasn't much room in his life, in the last decades of his life, besides business and books. I should say this is the closest we have of a picture to Mr. Clements smiling. He, according to accounts, was actually a fairly cordial and congenial guy, but the photographs we have available do not reflect this side of his personality. As a budding, very proud book collector, 1914, Mr. Clements puts out a catalog, a checklist of his great treasures. Uncommon books, uncommon, scarce, rare books, American history, Bay City, Michigan. And then in 1920, I may have gone, yeah, there we go. In 1920, he puts out another catalog. He's got more treasures, and he's even more proud. So he issues this, tells the world what a great collector he is. But by then, he has another plan in mind. He has a long-lasting legacy goal. He wants to know that he will be remembered as a collector. And in 1920, he offers to donate his library to the University of Michigan and to build it a home for his collection. University accepts very quickly, in part because they can recognize quite easily what a magnificent gift they've been offered, in part because Mr. Clements is a very powerful member of the Board of Regents. He was a dominating factor on the board for almost 25 years. And he puts that influence to very good effect in insisting that his library will be next to the president's house. It's kind of ironic, historically, the university tears down the twin to the president's house, the oldest building on campus, to build an American history library next to the president's. But Mr. Clements insisted, and thus it became so. I am very surprised that at the same time he did not demand that the president move out so that the director could live in that house. And I wish he had, because I've always wanted to walk to work. June 1923, Mr. Clements and the university officially opened the new library to the public. Although to Mr. Clements, the public did not mean very many people. He declared in his speech at the opening, "I do not want undergraduates in my library. I do not want graduate students in my library, and I do not want faculty in my library," which sort of left the audience wondering why we were dedicating a library. And he went on to explain that he only wanted the great American historians of each generation to come out once a year and look at his collection, which in effect meant he wanted a mausoleum. No doubt some of you here today are among the hundreds of thousands of UM students since then who didn't feel welcome in the Clements Library. Our first director believed that Mr. Clements was right, and even if he hadn't, Mr. Clements lived for 11 years after the dedication, and every day either telephoned or sent a telegram to Randolph Adams to tell him how to do his job. So we were a closed library until the 1950s, when Howard Peckham opened the doors a bit. 1970s, John Dan opened them very wide and said anyone who wanted to come in was welcome. Today we serve about 1,200 readers a year, and more than half of them are UM undergraduates. So I think of us as one of the unique things about this campus. And in a public university, I think undergraduate education is the mission. It's the first priority for the Clements Library. In his 1923 dedication speech, Mr. Clements said, "This day and hour mark the conclusion of a book collector's career." How many of you collect something? Yep, do you believe that he meant it? He didn't mean it. He might have meant it when he said it. He had no ability to live up to it. He went on collecting passionately, obsessively, for the remainder of his life. In 1925, he buys the papers of Sir Henry Clinton, who was the principal British Army commander in North America during the Revolution. And it includes wonderful handwritten treasures. This is a British spy's hand-drawn map of Valley Forge and the American encampment there, which was transmitted to General Clinton as the commander-in-chief. Clinton papers include some beautiful maps. This is a hand-drawn, hand-colored map of Newport, Rhode Island, 1783. We have more than 500 maps like this in the collection. Hand-drawn, absolutely unique. The next largest collection of them is at the Library of Congress, which has 100. And you'll have to forgive me for all this bragging. I had nothing to do with creating the library or the collections. I'm very, very happy I get to be the director. I feel I can brag about what my predecessors accomplished. The Clinton papers also include the correspondence of Benedict Arnold with John Andre about selling West Point to the British. These are letters in code that Arnold sent to Andre saying that he would like 20,000 British pounds for becoming a trader. He thinks it's cheap at any price, and they come within an eyelash of turning West Point over to the British. American Rangers capture Andre, and he is hanged, but Arnold barely escapes the men that General Washington sends after him. And Mr. Clements keeps going. 1927, he buys the papers of Lord Germain, Secretary of State for the American colonies in the British administration. And then in 1930, he has lost all control. Every time he buys something expensive, he says, I'm done, I'm stopping, I don't have any money. In 1930, he buys 11 of these large boxes of the papers of General Thomas Gage, who had commanded in North America for the British between the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. Here you see a picture of Howard Peckham in the foreground and Lloyd Brown standing beside him, opening the Gage papers for the first time. And Howard sitting on two of the boxes as a chair. The Gage papers are an extraordinary collection. It's tens of thousands of pieces of paper about the forts and the troops and the controversies and the interaction with Native Americans and slaves and the upstart colonials, et cetera, et cetera. Here we have General Gage writing to his subordinate Francis Smith, and he is saying to him, I want you to go out to Lexington and Concord. This is April of 1775. Go out there, pick up the military stores that the colonials have been secreting away. You probably won't have any trouble because they're just colonials, but defend yourself if you have to. That's the document that starts the American Revolution. Francis Smith takes his British soldiers out to Lexington and Concord. They are defeated on the way back, and we are at war, and the United States is about to be born. Also in the Clinton papers, we have Charles Cornwallis was the British commander at Yorktown in October of 1781. He surrenders his army, which effectively ends the war. We have a 14-page letter that he wrote to his commanding officer, General Clinton. The first half page is, I have the utmost embarrassment to acquaint your honor with the fact that I have surrendered the post. The remaining 13 and a half pages are, and it's not my fault. He blames everybody else on the planet for his defeat. And he says, you know, you didn't support me, the fleet didn't win out against Rochambeau, and you're not pinning this one on me, Buster. So they did, of course, in the end. Mr. Clements dies 1934. The library keeps going. We keep collecting, we fill gaps in his collection. This is the title page of Antonio Pigafetta's first-hand account of Magellan's attempt to circumnavigate the globe. It's published in 1525, and this, I think, is the last copy. That we bought it in the 60s, last copy to come on the market, but it's the first account of what Magellan tried to accomplish. More recent great acquisition is this map by John Fitch of the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region. We saw a copy of the Fitch map in 1930, Randolph Adams did, and we chased it until 2007 when we were finally able to purchase it. It's a magnificent cartographic source, and the fact that we waited 77 years is just more proof of the truth of the old adage that institutions can be patient, because we will outlive individuals. And you may not sell it to us, but your children or your grandchildren may. They may give it to us, which would be even better. Collecting things like this engraved view of New York in the 1760s. We acquired this just a few years ago. Here you have a watercolor of Fort Niagara. Edward Walsh was a British military surgeon, toured the Great Lakes in the first decade of the 19th century, did these beautiful little watercolors of the forts and the communities that we visited. One of the earliest views of Detroit from across on the Windsor shore as part of the Walsh portfolio. And in 92 years, we have expanded the parameters. Mr. Clements stopped at 1800. He was born in 1861, so anything after 1800 was pretty modern to him. We have crept forward gradually to 1900. So we have wonderful resources on encounters with Native Americans in the 19th century. This is Eunice Barber, narrative of the tragical death, and the coffins represent the members of her family who died in that encounter. These are what are known as Indian captivity narratives, and we have a fabulous collection of them. Or mid-19th century travels the Trans-Mississippi West. Europeans come over here by the dozens, many of them wealthy, many of them looking for adventure, and they finance expeditions. This is Prince Maximilian Zuide's account of his going out to the far west and bringing an artist and a botanist and a historian with him to document it. Native American history with rich, rich resources. George Catlin, a name some of you certainly have heard of, published half a dozen great books of illustrations on the Native Americans of the plains and Western America. Well, the California Gold Rush, 1848, 1849. This is G.G. Foster's Gold Mines of California, 1848. We have most of the great guidebooks for how do you get across from St. Louis across to California. Most of them written by people who never made the trip, by the way. So they're wildly inaccurate. And most of you have probably heard of the Donner Party, guys who went up in the mountains in California, wound up eating each other to stay alive throughout the winter. There's a great story about the Donner Party is about to go up in autumn, and a mountain man comes down, and he says, "You can't go up there. It's going to snow. There's no pass. You're going to die." And they pull out one of these pamphlets and say, "But we have a guidebook." And I hope it gave them some sustenance and solace during their months in the snow. Great collections of early American photography. These are what are known as daguerreotypes, which are photographs printed on a silver backing, 1830s to 1860s. Thomas Easterly was one of the great American daguerreotype makers, and this is a nice little quartet of his pictures of Niagara Falls, which was then becoming one of the great tourist attractions. For a Michigan audience, I should certainly mention that our greatest photograph collection is the David Tinder collection. Dave Tinder is an engineer retired in the Detroit area, is gradually transferring over to us about 40,000 early Michigan photographs from the 1840s to the 19-teens. It's a fabulous assortment of images of people, places, events, great documentation of Michigan's history. Or both 19th century ethnicity, the interplay of different groups, different races, different ethnicities. This is a great example. This is the only first-hand account of the Detroit race riot in 1863. There are riots over the Civil War not going well, the draft being imposed. The white population of Detroit riots and destroys much of the black portion of the city. This is written by an anonymous author who is very sympathetic to the African Americans who are being persecuted this way. We paid $35 for our copy in 1948, and for the next 60 years it was the only copy on the planet. And then Yale got one in 2008, and Yale paid $35,000 for their copy, which is just more proof that librarians at public universities in the Midwest are a lot smarter than librarians at private schools in the Northeast. Or the Civil War, the great conflict of the 19th century, as Oliver Wendell Holmes said, that touched our hearts with fire. We have fabulous printed and manuscript resources. This is a great example of the kinds of illustrated sheet music that came out during the war. This is dedicated to the 22nd Regiment, New York Union Grays. Again, a pre-electronic age. You wanted music, you bought sheet music, and you played it on the organ or the piano in your parlor. And the illustrations today are what many of our researchers want to have. Or the wars for control of the American West. As white settlement moves west, the Native Americans resist. One of the great, most famous incidents, of course, is Custer's Last Stand. This is John Mulvey's highly fanciful picture of Custer's Last Stand. Custer standing tall in the middle of the conflict, he and his brave men fighting against the Native Americans around them. It tells you a lot more about white perspectives in the 1890s than it tells you anything about the accuracy of how that battle unfolded. But still, It's an interesting source. Or something really important, early American sports. We've got some really neat material on the growth of the leisure activities of Americans after the Civil War. This is Spalding's official basketball guide for 1899, which I think says that UM will have good guards and swingmen, but really needs a center. So nothing much has changed in a century and a half, I'm afraid. Or one of my favorite areas, true crime. We have a fabulous collection of the accounts, the autobiographical, biographical, etc., prints, books, pamphlets on homicide in pre-1900 America. This is The Poison Fiend, Life and Conviction of Lydia Sherman. Lydia Sherman, let's see, she admitted to murdering, I think, 3 husbands and 6 children, but the historians who studied her said she may have been modest about the body count. And this is a great example of the lurid, sensational stuff that came out. Equate it with the stuff you see at the checkout lines in supermarkets. This is how you got your news, because you didn't have Entertainment Tonight to tell you what was going on. The upshot is that the Clements Library is one of the half-dozen greatest early American history libraries on the planet. I spoke to the regents a few years ago about the library shortly after I arrived, and I said to them, you know, sports success comes and goes on this campus, but for 9 decades, the Clements has been a top 5 American history library every single year. It's something that people connected to the university ought to be proud of. You ought to know more about it. The treasures in this, the rare book room, you see Mr. Clements' portrait over the mantel, they're just extraordinary. You can't find them at more than 4 or 5 other libraries anywhere. And our peers are at Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Brown. It just doesn't exist in this type of quality and quantity of sources. We are tremendously fortunate to have a library like this at the university. Library and its friends, of course, are equally fortunate to have a great university like UM around us as our world. For you, as alums, the Clements ought to be a source of pride for you. When you brag about your university, it should be somewhere on your list. Your favorite sport, yes. Whatever you majored in, yes. Your favorite tavern when you were here as a student, of course. But the Clements deserves to be on the list. It's really something wonderful. And we've been away from our beautiful Albert Kahn building for more than 2 years. Big renovation, big construction project, $18 million. The project is supposed to end at the end of this month. I mentioned this to a visitor yesterday. I said, we'll be done at the end of October, and he looked at me and said, this year? Because we were standing right next to the site. If you go over there today, you will probably bet your last nickel that we will not be done at the end of this month. But the company has a great reputation. They have people going in and out of it day and night. I'm taking their word for it, that I get my keys back on November 2nd. If so, we move back in November and December, and we will have all sorts of what are known as soft openings in January, February, and March of next year. We will culminate with a ribbon-cutting ceremony with the president and the regents on April 11th, which is a Monday in the afternoon. If you like the Clements, we'll want to see you there. In the meantime, some of you may be retired. I expect you to start volunteering at the Clements. Some of you may still be working. I expect you to quit your jobs and look for employment at some nice cultural heritage institution. Some of you may have children and grandchildren who are students here at UM. I expect you to order them to change their majors to early American history. Now, I understand that unanimous acceptance of that last one will mean that you'll have a lot of 20-somethings living in your basement after graduation, but that's a really small price to pay for their lifetime of happiness in the Clements Library orbit. My first slide, you heard the title was A Great Library Easily Begets Affection. There's another part to that quote, and that is, which may deepen into love. It's by an English essayist named Augustine Birrell. He wrote it about a century ago. If there is a library on the planet that proves that Augustine Birrell was a wise man, it's the Clements Library. It is the type of place, if you have any interest in our national heritage or any interest in rare stuff, you can't help but fall in love with the Clements if you get acquainted with us. So, January 4th, I think, is the first Monday in January. That's our day. We are open for business to students, researchers, and the public. I expect to see all of you in the Clements, if not on the 4th of January, no later than the 6th. Angela's going to be taking names. Really is something you need to get acquainted with. So, questions, thoughts? Sire.
Thank you very much, Director, for your wonderful lecture. I understand very much in the museum world that museums prefer donations rather than having to bid and pay out money for acquisitions.
Well, of course.
Yeah, it's the way it is.
Sure.
But let's say that alumni and others that donate to the Clements for the purpose of you bidding at auctions and things of that nature in order to get future acquisitions. Has there ever been a time where you or your staff or any one of your predecessors had bid for something that was really would have been an asset to the Clements, but because of your funding or what you have in the kitty, you lost out on?
Absolutely. It happens with some frequency to almost all institutions like ours. All collectors, all librarians, all curators prefer donated material to purchased material. There is a limit. No matter what your budget is, you're going to run out of acquisitions money every year. And every year, my curators and I say, we're going to have to pass that auction up because we spent too much. The director spent too much earlier in the year. I have a way of looking at this that I think is reasonably accurate. Any university will always pay for a pretty good unit, whether it's the chemistry department or it's the library or it's something else. You want greatness. The alums and the other supporters have to make it a partnership. There has to be money aside from the general budget. The Clements has been very fortunate. We've had great supporters. We have a friends group called the Clements Library Associates, which was founded in the 1940s. It has bought us at least tens of millions of dollars worth of material, if not hundreds, in the succeeding years. But you guys are proud alums. I bet most of you have donated. You've got the university and your estate planning, et cetera, et cetera. You want greatness of any aspect of the university, that's what it takes, because the general budget will fund pretty good, and the rest of it is on those of us who are supporters, who are alums, et cetera, who are friends, and you've heard all this before. You know all of this, and if the Clements is doing something you think is important, Angela and I would love to talk to you about this, of course. The renovations project, the budget was about $18 million. $8 million of that came out of the private sector, out of people who wanted to get us better renovated building in addition to the collection space, et cetera, et cetera. That's the way of the world. No university, maybe Harvard has enough money to do anything it wants to do, but I noticed that they keep asking their graduates for money, so maybe not. How many of you collect Americana or think, okay, good. You guys really need to come over. Get the tour, sit with the director in the great room or the rare book room, handle the treasures. For most of us, not for my brother, the stockbroker, who only wants to know how much is it worth and why don't you sell it, but for most of us, holding a letter that, say, Abraham Lincoln wrote in his own hand provides something of a thrill. There's a reason that when we go to Washington, thousands of us every day line up at the National Archives to see the Declaration of Independence in its original manuscript form. Authenticity gives us an emotional as well as an intellectual thrill. And that's what the Clements offers students and scholars. You don't have to look at it on a screen. You don't have to use a facsimile. You don't have to use a digitized reproduction. You've got the real thing in your hands. And for folks who are attuned to it, that's a really special opportunity. Other thoughts? Who's going to win the football game tomorrow? It's going to be a test, though, isn't it? It'd be lovely if we do come out ahead. And then, of course, next week, we have an even bigger test. Sir, you better wait till the microphone reaches you. We're filming this for posterity. So.
Right. Question about, there's the other library, the Bentley out of North Campus. How do you, what is your arrangement with them? Yep. What they do, what you do? Right.
The question is about the Bentley Library over on North Campus next to the Gerald Ford Library. I'm happy to have an opportunity to brag about the Bentley as well. The Bentley does two principal areas: the history of the University of Michigan. They're the university archives. All of the paper and electronic records that are created every day on this university eventually flow into the Bentley, and they have been for decades, going back to the 18 teens. I'm told now that the university either sends or receives 1.2 million emails a day. All of that Bentley has to figure out how to take care of. But they are also the university's collection of material on the history of the state of Michigan. Michigan residents, Michigan politicians, because the state of Michigan does not collect the governor's papers, does not collect the papers of the congressional delegation. Those mostly go to the Bentley. So if you have a proud Michigan heritage, the Bentley is your library for researching, for documenting. They recently got Governor Granholm's papers. I think they recently got John Dingell's papers, etc. With a big congressional delegation, you have some turnover. And Bentley is constantly saying, oh my gosh, another 2,000 cartons coming from Washington. We stop at 1,900 because we're really smart. And there are no 2,000 carton collections of 18th century papers. A big Rev War collection might be 2 cubic feet. Before you get to photocopiers and typewriters, the collections are a great deal smaller. So our space needs are infinitely smaller than the Bentley's. Bentley is a great collection, and whether it's the history of this university or the history of this state, Terry McDonald and his people have terrific material to show you.
This is just an observation. I graduated in the 50s from Ann Arbor and went out and built, at the time, the largest book distribution company in the country. That's before Amazon came in and pretty much took everything their own way. But it's amazing to me that I never knew about this library, and today I just stumbled in here. So I'm thrilled to hear your lecture, but it's so unfortunate that myself, my daughter, my grandson never knew about it. Yeah. So hopefully now we will. But thank you.
Yeah, we genuinely welcome students, just as Mr. Clements genuinely barred them at the door. Gene Power, founder of University Microfilms, one of the great businessmen in the 20th century Ann Arbor, was a young salesman in the 1930s, and he used to come to the Clements because he liked Randolph Adams, our first director. And they would have coffee, etc., smoke cigarettes together. And one time, Power was in the great room, and there was a visiting professor getting the tour from Miss Steer. Miss Steer was reportedly 6 feet tall and a very scary person. She was brilliant, but she had a forbidding demeanor. And the visiting professor, according to Power's autobiography, is trying to curry favor with this dominating presence. And he says, boy, this is wonderful. The undergraduates must use this library all the time. And she looks down at him and sneers and says, the undergraduates are not welcome. Oh, he says, well, gosh, the graduate students must use the library all the time. We do not let graduate students into this library. Oh, the faculty, I bet the faculty use the library all the time. the faculty are not let into the Clements library. Right now the poor guy's a little puddle on the floor, and he looks up and says, "Who does use the library?" And she looks down and says, "Dr. Adams and Mr. Clements use the library." Well, that's a lovely story and all of that, but it doesn't speak well for why the library was put on this campus. I am quite proud of my predecessors, particularly Howard Peckham and particularly John Dan. They opened the doors, and they said, "Students, please come in. Come in, professors, bring your classes. It's part of the mission, it's part of the philosophy of this place." Once a year, some student comes in with an attitude and says, "What do you mean I can't take the Washington letters back to my dorm room? What do you mean I can't use a highlighter on that Pigafetta letter? Do you know who my father is?" Well, once a year we can take that kind of. Most of the students are reverential, they're respectful, and they are getting an experience at the Clements that they can't get at Northwestern, that they can't get at Illinois, they can't get at Penn State. And when they come back for homecoming 40 years from now, my successors will be able to say, "Remember when you came in and how wonderful it was?" Not, "Let me tell you about that building you never went into while you were a student." I came here in November of 2008, took a walking tour, get used to the campus. Young lady, young student, giving the tour to parents and prospective students. She walks us around, she tells us about all the buildings, and she stops in front of the Clements to catch her breath and looks from the sidewalk and says, "I have no idea what this place is. Let's move on." So I wrote to her supervisor and said, "Surely we can do better than this," and gave them information. And my understanding is that now the students actually do have some idea what we're doing. The other thing, of course, which you probably heard when you were students, "Oh, Clements, yeah, isn't that Mark Twain's real name? I wonder if Mark Twain's papers are in there." So we are educating. We are getting the word out, and my boss is dean of the Rackham Graduate School. So we argue about which is the most elegant building on the campus. She says Rackham, I say Clements. Either way, if it's a toss-up, you got to go into both of them. They're both magnificent structures. Albert Kahn, we know, said he designed hundreds of buildings, including some of the most beautiful buildings on campus. He said the Clements Library was his favorite structure of all the buildings he ever created. So I think he was right. Sorry. Yeah, a lot of the renovations in the Kahn building, the 1923 structure, will be invisible to you. They are systems, they are plumbing, they are electronics, they are sewage removal, etc. So they're behind the walls. The big difference most people will notice, if you come to see a staff member, we have completely redone the basement. If you ever came in for a meeting with Associate Director Brian Dunnigan, who's been with us for now 20 years now, and you came to the old building and you wanted to have a meeting with Brian, he had to leave the door to his office open because with a second chair, he had no way to close the door. He was in something the size of a small shoebox, basically. That's all been redone. We will have now 2 meeting rooms in the basement for classroom orientations with all kinds of AV things. The big difference for you folks will be you come up the south steps, and that's the reading room now instead of an empty space. We used it 10 days a year for receptions and public presentations, and another 20 days a year for class orientations. It was dark 90% of the time. It's 30% of the building in terms of the square footage. So we have moved our reading room out of the basement, which I thought was a horrible location, into the great room. Students and other researchers will be studying here. And I think of that as the equivalent of singing hymns in the Sistine Chapel. That's going to be a setting for somebody who likes history. So that's the big difference you'll see. The big difference for us in our work is we have built an underground addition to the east side of the building. East is on the right as you're looking from South U. That will house all the mechanicals, which used to be either in the basement or on the roof, and the top floor will be collection storage. So we'll have much more of the collection near us than we would have otherwise. But that will only stick up about 6 inches from the lawn, so you won't know that it's there.
Do you do exhibitions for the public, any special presentations of the material?
Well, we will have more display cases. Any of you who visited our exhibits, we have those big 1920s exhibit cases. We are adding some custom-made cases in the south end of the Avenir room for visitors, so we'll have a greater capacity. In this electronic age, we do a ton of things on the website, of course. There are many, many of our constituents who are under the age of 30. That's the first place they look. And try to go out and do more public presentations. We publish a good deal. We do 8 to 10 public lectures a year. We will do those in Hatcher, as we have during our exile, our Ellsworth exile, as one of my staff members calls it. We're trying to make the place better known. The mission is research. The mission is people sitting in the chairs using the collections. But the exhibits, the public presentations, the publications are the way that other people who may never want to write a book about early American history, but who are interested, they still get to experience the library. And we bring in some good speakers. We brought in MacArthur Award winners, Pulitzer people, and get on the mailing list. And you'll be able to, all the lectures are free. We give you cookies and punch. We only harangue you every other time about you should be an associate and why haven't you donated, etc. Ann and Angela, you get the 1,000-yard stare from them if you eat too many cookies and haven't given us anything. So it's an opportunity.
Maybe clarify
Friday. We're moving back. It's new territory for us. The reading room has not been in the great room in decades. We're going to try Monday through Thursday for readers, all day Friday for visitors to exhibits, architecture, etc. And any individual who says, I'd like to sit down and just be shown treasures, I'll put you in the rare book room. I will show you an hour or 2 hours worth of the greatest Americana you could ever hope to see. I will enjoy that because I'm in this field, because I'm a bibliophile, as my wife likes to call us. Bibliophile is not nearly descriptive enough for Leslie. You guys are bibliophiles, and I am. That's why I do this kind of work. So if you like the stuff, you will have an opportunity, hands-on opportunity, to look at it with me. Come up today, get a business card, and then call me early next year, and we'll set something up. I'm happy to do that because I really enjoy showing people who appreciate it, the materials that we have. Other questions, other stuff, other problems like parking that I should resolve for you. Did you get good seats for the game? I can take care of that for you. Sir?
I'm an historian and I've done a lot of work on California history, the linkage between Ann Arbor and Berkeley.
I'm going to bring you a microphone.
One of the chapters of a book that I'm working on right now is Berkeley, the Ann Arbor of the West.
Ah.
And it shows one time 1/3 of the faculty from Michigan. They became, next to the president, Wheeler, they were 3 times they were the equivalent of vice presidents. Mm-hmm. And one in particular who got his bachelor's and PhD, skipped the master's under the university system in the 1880s, mm-hmm. Lexus Longy, is really the philosopher of what became known as the junior high school and the junior college. Mm. Now, my question is this. I have probably the best collection of California history, better than anything in the San Francisco Bay Area today.
Wow.
A number of the bookstores have been closed, and when I decide not to do any more writing and research, it sounds like at least the Bentley might like some of my stuff relative to the Michigan history. Who would take the California history?
We'd take it. Anything prior to 1900, we'd be happy to have. There are certainly some good dealers still left in the San Francisco area. John Windle comes to mind.
Private dealers.
Yeah, Nick Aratakis. Okay. It depends on we only collect primary sources. That's what we do. We leave the secondary sources to the university library. But anything on America, prior to 1900 that's an original would certainly be of interest to us. And I'm sure Terry and his people at the Bentley would be delighted to hear from you about the possibility of filling gaps in the Michigan collections as well.
The last time I was in that room that you got on the screen there was a friend of mine, Jack Keenan, who had a collection of drawings. He was the head of the art department at J. Walter Thompson, and he had about 180 drawings, and the collection was donated to Clements, and they had a nice reception in that room for him, I remember, a number of years ago.
Wow. Well, I mean, I love that room. We've been apart from it for 2 years, and my colleagues can tell you, they can watch me some days just walk out in there and throw my arms up to the ceiling and say, this is all mine. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have landed here. I was out in the boondocks for a long time. I first came to the Clements in 1996. I was working in Wisconsin, and I came over to see an exhibit here because I'd heard about the library, of course. So I drove down from Madison, I drove back, and as I drove back, I said to myself, John Dan is older than I am. He's going to retire someday. And when he does, boy, I hope their search committee gives me a call. And they did, and as Ann has said, we had a really weak pool, so somehow, we chose Kevin. And for a guy like me, there is no better place in the world to have landed. It is an extraordinary collection in a great college town, at a great university, and it's a small enough staff that I get to do some curatorial stuff. My colleagues let me occasionally play with the collections, and I'm just like a kid in a candy store. So I spoke to an alumni group a couple of years ago, and one of the ladies raised her hand and said in this hushed voice, boy, you're really passionate. And I said, no, madam, passionate's way back there in the rearview mirror. I'm nuts. And I'm perfectly happy being so, because it's heaven to someone like me. So if you feel the same way about collecting, you come see us, and we'll give you some thrilling moments, to say the least. Okay, I release you for lunch, and go blue.